So we waiting on today, Phil?
So in about 5 minutes, Mr. Layne Gardener, the one and only, he's going to be coming on, and we're going to be talking about the Old Dutch Capuchin. And first off, is that how you pronounce it, Capuchin? Or is it Capuchin?
I think it's like the monkey.
And how do you say that?
Capuchin.
Capuchin, Old Dutch Capuchin. Because I've heard people say it both ways. We'll get it from the expert himself. So we'll talk a little bit. He came out with the book, Old Dutch Capuchin. I actually won this book in the raffle at the Utah Pigeon Show. Yeah, I think if a nipple makes an appearance, it changes the rating.
Good thing we're audio only. I got a face for radio.
So the things I was going to go over, it's kind of weird, because, he already goes over a lot of this in the book, but, history of the breed, what breeds go into it, pros and cons of that breed, if it's good for beginners or more advanced fanciers, that sort of thing, show prep. Because he did have some pretty interesting things in his books about, one of the things he talks about in show prep is if you have a loft that's jammed full of birds, that's bad show prep because you're stressing out the birds and everything else. I want to get his idea about how many birds should be, like, for example, like an 8x8 loft. Because I think that's something where a lot of fanciers just, like you said before in that one, like the newbie question of how many birds can I stuff in this thing?
I mean, no, that's two different questions, though. How many birds can I put in this loft versus
how many should I?
What loft should I be conditioning in? That's two different questions, because in other competitions, they have what's called a keep stall, and they condition them in that.
That's right. Yeah, Colton Friedel, when we talked to him, he has a separate loft just for putting birds in. Right. So they got a big area to kind of just distress and look good and stay clean.
Yeah. No, I think you should have a conditioning pen, not just a communal loft if you're trying to condition birds.
Yeah.
So I don't think, while it does matter how many birds you put in your loft, I don't think that's what he's meaning by that. Just my assumption, but we'll ask him.
Right.
We'll ask him for sure, because I want to know.
They talked about the bathing, to bathe or not to bathe, if it makes a difference, what kind of stuff to put in the water. The whole chapter on show prep is really good, just really good. Like, there's some stuff that's kind of specific to the, I don't know, can we start using an acronym, to the ODC, like trimming the hood and stuff like that? But most of the stuff was pretty general, like it was helpful for anybody with any breed. And then there's some stuff in there too that applies to the ODC.
It took me 5 minutes to figure out what the hell ODC is.
That's what I said. I was like, are we ready for this? Can we just start saying acronym? Because we're going to be saying that breed a bunch, Old Dutch Capuchin. Because Old GO, Old German Owls, everybody throws that acronym around like it's nothing, and everybody knows what they're supposed to know what it means. Well, let's see. ODC, 3, Old Dutch Capuchin. So, I mean, you're shaving a few syllables off by, doing it that way. So
that's an acronym for something else, but I'll tell you later.
Oh. So, wait, should I not be using ODC?
We should look that up in the Urban Dictionary.
Okay, before we just start throwing it around.
I'm going to do that right now.
All right, yeah. How you doing, Layne?
Good.
Are you a master breeder of the Old Dutch Capuchins?
Yes, from the NPA and also from the North American Capuchin Club.
There's your clarity, Phil.
I was just going to say Capuchin.
I knew you were going to ask how to pronounce it.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, and I think it's like the monkey. How do you pronounce that? Capuchin. No, because I've always said Capuchin, so now this is going to be hard for me. I'm probably going to slip up.
It doesn't matter. There's a lot of people that say Capuchin.
So we got with us today Layne Gardener. He is an NPA master breeder of the breed Old Dutch Capuchin and the North American Capuchin Club master breeder as well. He's also the photographer for the National Pigeon Association. And he just came out with a book, Old Dutch Capuchin, an illustrated encyclopedia. And we're going to talk all about that breed of birds today. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
First off, I was telling Chris earlier that book, I just want to say this, it's breed specific, but it's just a great book to have for any breed, especially the prepping for a show and stuff like that we were going through. And you just have so much good advice in there. I mean, it talks about health and everything else, and you can apply a lot of that to almost any breed that you're messing with. And of course, if you do have an Old Dutch Capuchin, then it would be really good to have for the specific stuff, especially with the trimming and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of general information in there as well as the specific to the breed kinds of things.
So you've been into pigeons since you were like 3 or 4 years old, huh?
I'm just one of these weird guys that always liked pigeons. I can remember as just not a toddler, but just a little bit older than that, liking to just watch pigeons. I liked them.
And your first breed was the West of England tumblers, is that right?
Yes, there was a young man that had flying West of England tumblers, and he lived right across the street from my elementary school. And when I would be walking home, I would see those, and he had kind of red splash looking birds, non-specific markings, but they had feathers on their feet, and they were unlike anything I'd ever seen, and I just loved them. I thought they were wonderful.
So the colors are what kind of drew you into that West of England tumbler breed?
Somewhat. They were just unusual. All I had ever seen prior to that were common pigeons, and I loved common pigeons. I mean, the first common pigeons I ever saw were blue bars, and to this day I love blue bars. I think that's a very attractive thing. But when I saw the West of England's, it was something brand new to me, and I really liked that as well.
So can you get into the a little bit of the history of the Old Dutch Capuchin?
Sure. We know that the breed is at least 500 years old, and we know that because it's depicted in paintings that are that old. The Jacobin and the Capuchin for many years were really the same breed, and it wasn't until the latter part of the 1800s that the Jacobin breeders decided to start breeding for a very long feathered breed. Prior to that, it wasn't nearly as long as what we have today. And so it was about that point where they really separated into two breeds. And with the Jacobin breeders going for the extreme length of feather, and the Capuchin breeders just breeding for the novelty of the ornaments. And it was pretty much kind of a breed that you would find on farms and that kind of a thing. It was not, because it was not as impressive as a long feathered Jacobin. It was kind of considered, I wouldn't say a kid's pigeon, but it was not considered an extreme show pigeon. So it hasn't become really recognized as a good show pigeon until the late 50s, and then from there on, there's been various specialty clubs that have helped to refine the breed and make it where it's a little showier. In the United States and Canada, we have the North American Capuchin Club, which sponsors the breed. One of my goals has always been to breed the same breed that we have in Europe. One of the things that we Americans are really good about is taking a breed from somewhere else and immediately changing it. And in fact, I remember as a youngster with my Capuchins, a seasoned breeder coming to me and say, "Oh, I know how to make those really good. Cross them with a Jacobin," which is the opposite direction where we want to go. We want an ornamented breed, but we want the tail to be relatively short. And of course, in crossing with a Jacobin, you get a very long tail and a long feather breed. So that's definitely not the direction to go. So I've maintained contact with the Dutch club and with the German club to ensure that the breed doesn't change here. We want the same one that's in Europe.
And what was the crosses that went into make that breed exactly?
Hank Mosler in the 1950s, he was a Dutchman. He went to a pigeon market like on a weekend type thing, and he happened to see some capuchin. He said, "Oh, I remember seeing these when I was a kid at a park." And so he said, "I'd like to breed some of these." He was able to purchase some, and he did some crossing to refine them because they were, like I said, pretty much like farmers' pigeons. They were pigeons that people would keep on their farm, were pretty, but they would eat them. That's what the goal really was. There was no exhibition of them at that point. So he said, "I think that we can make this into a really nice show type of breed." And so he was the one that had the vision to write standard and to look for specific qualities to refine. So he crossed with nuns, and the reason he did that was to improve the hood, or the shell portion of the ornaments. So it'd be nice and open and rounded with a good shape. A lot of times in the unrefined birds, the hood tends to be kind of V-shaped, and that could come back to crossing with Jacobins, I'm not certain. But it's kind of V-shaped, and you don't want that. You want a nice rounded hood, similar to the crest of a nun. So he used the nuns in there. Another property he also got from the nun is a beautiful pearl eye. We want a good pearl eye on the birds, and we want a nice body on them. The Dutch, I want to say this very carefully. In America, we have a saying that you go Dutch. Means you pay your own expenses, with the implication that the Dutch are frugal to a fault, if I can say it that way. So the Dutch, they don't like to eat their pigeons or culls. You put all this money into feeding them and caring for them, you need to get something out of them. So they wanted a little bit bigger body on them, so that when they did prepare them for the table, there would be some meat on them.
So it's interesting that you say that they were a utility breed. There's a lot of pigeon breeds these days that were originally intended as a utility breed, like the powder we were just talking about the other day.
Oh yeah, the American Bohemian powder. That's strange to think about, some of these fancier looking birds that were meat birds. I guess I think of a king as just a really plain, big, borderline chicken.
But I wouldn't characterize those necessarily as utility breeds, but they're maybe dual purpose in the way that you look at them. If you're going to put all this effort into them, and cost in Europe, it's pretty expensive for feed and so forth. You at least ought to get some meals out of them.
Chris and I were talking about the part of your book on show prep, and you had an interesting part in there that says overcrowding is just it's bad. It's going to stress your bird out, and if you're going to be conditioning a bird for show prep, to keep it in a bigger loft. And we didn't understand exactly. Are you saying that you move that bird to a different loft, or you're just saying that your loft in general is a lot bigger than most with less birds inside?
Well, most people keep too many pigeons, so I was just trying to say that if you're going to keep too many pigeons, you need to have the space for them. It's got to be a bigger square footage for them. The size of the loft is really not that important. It's more important that you have enough space per bird so that the birds aren't too close together and stressing.
What's your recommendation for space per bird? What's your pigeon math?
I've heard different things, 2 square feet, 3 square feet. I don't really measure it quite like that. I try to keep the numbers as low as I can. I think most of us have kind of a sense when, oh, that pen's getting a little crowded. And you can watch, the birds will be interacting in a more aggressive way when there's too many in there. So I don't have a specific formula that I use.
Gotcha. So for clarity, I guess I was on the wrong track. You were right, Phil. For clarity, I don't tell him he's right very often. For clarity, you don't actually have a conditioning loft then? Is that what you're saying?
I do.
Oh, you do?
So the way that I do my birds, with my capuchins, I do all of the breeding in individual pens.
Okay.
And I've done that for 30 some years. I'm a little bit of a control freak, and when I put my birds in individuals like that, I know that they're not going to be mating with somebody else. Nobody's going to come in from another nest box and scalp the young or chase them off their eggs or anything like that. I just like that control that I have over that aspect of it. So when the young are ready to wean, I keep them in an individual, put them in a different individual with a group of about 10 of them. I can keep them in kind of a large group there. They help each other in finding the feed and water and seem to do pretty well. And then when it's time to move them from there, which is at least a month later, I like to make sure that they've just acquainted themselves with the process of being on their own. I move them to an open loft, which is my conditioning loft. I have 3 conditioning pens, and I'll put them all in the middle pen. And when the young start showing that they're a cockbird, then they get moved to the left pen so that I can keep the cocks and the hens separated. They seem to do better that way. And then just keep the numbers down, and it works well for me.
Okay, very good.
You had an article in there about bathing and why some people say, you do it too much. It doesn't really need to be done. And then of course there's people who do the borax. You had another chemical, or I've never seen that before. It had like an old timey looking front on the bottle that you put in the bath water.
There's several things that I'll use when I give them baths. I like bathing my birds or having my birds access to taking a bath. I was talking with a friend of mine who was a successful exhibitor of Modinas, and he says, no, I never give my birds a bath. They don't need it. It's a waste of time. And he's done well. So obviously for his situation, it's fine. For me, I think I even mentioned this in the book, I think the birds like it. So I'm going to let them take a bath because I think it's good for them if they like it. In the bath water, sometimes I will let them bathe with just straight water. I don't put anything in it at all. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of permectin liquid, which is made for killing flies and stuff like that. You put just a little bit in the water, turns it slightly milky, and it will kill external parasites. I also have some permethrin spray that comes in a aerosol can, and I'll spray that directly on the birds, right on the feathers, and that's fine too. That gets also rid of external parasites. And then again, in the bath water, I will a couple times a year, not often, a couple times a year, put some borax in there, and you put it in warm water so that it's more soluble if you do it that way. And then let them take a bath in it. And the soapy aspect of it cleans the feathers nice, and they're good to go.
Nice. Yeah, that just kind of made a light bulb click for me, because I'll put the borax in the bath pan for him every now and then, but I'm using a garden hose, and I'm like, that stuff doesn't really mix into the water very well. But I guess I should be using a little bit of warmer water to help break it down and get it mixed in there.
Yeah, it does seem to work better. The old frillback breeder, Tom McKay, told me that years and years ago. And I said, oh, okay, because I was doing the same thing you were doing. Just, throw it in there and put some water in it, and it's good to go. And it never really dissolved very well.
Nice. And then for this breed specifically, what are good conditioning tips that you do before a show to get that really looking good?
Okay, well, like I said, you have to keep the numbers of birds down. I'm in that unique position where I get to photograph all the champions in a show, and it's obvious in certain situations where you can see that the birds are coming from a loft that's too crowded, because you can look about the face and you can see kind of where the birds have been fighting and pecked on a little bit, and they don't have a smooth look to them. So the number one for me is you got to keep them in lower numbers. So you were talking about a formula or whatever. I don't have a formula, but I have a 8x6 pen, and I won't keep more than 20 in there. So it gives you kind of a little bit of a guideline. And they also have access to an outside fly pen. So again, the first thing is to make certain that they're not overcrowded. It keeps them healthier in all aspects. And then you can't have lice on your birds. You can't have any lice or mites or anything that might chew through feathers. So that's the part of it you have to take care of pretty soon. I'm a little bit lax during the breeding season, but about July or so, I get more serious about it and make certain that there's no lice or anything on my birds. So that ensures that the feathers are going to be in good condition without any holes in them or anything. My birds probably hate it when I pick them up, because just going through the loft, I'll pick up a bird and I just look through it, and if there's a feather that's ragged or broken in half or whatever, I pull it out. In that instance, it would be kind of like a forced molt. And even if the bird has gone through a complete molt, I still do that. And if there's any feathers that, for whatever reason, are not in pristine shape, I pull them out within 2 months of a show. Obviously, as we get close to a show, you can't do that because the feathers won't have grown back in by the time the show starts, but that keeps them going. Now, this is all stuff that's prior to getting them ready for show. So with the actual show prep, Old Dutch Capuchins have a red eye sear, and the feather dust will get on the eye sear, on the skin around the eye, and that powder makes the eye sear kind of, I don't know, pinkish or what have you. So I take with a Q-tip and a little bit of Vet RX. It's an oil that's manufactured for chickens, actually, for respiratory issues. But it's a corn oil base that has some eucalyptus in it or something like that. So you take a little bit of that oil on the tip of a Q-tip and you rub that on the eye sear. It takes that dust off. And so then the eye sear looks really bright red and just stands out nicely. You can use water. Water will do the same thing. It just doesn't last as long. By using the Vet RX, it should be good for the duration of the show. I also put the Vet RX a little bit on the beak, not on the wattle. You don't want it on the nose sear. So just on the beak, because it fills in any scratches or anything that might be on the beak. So the beak looks more showy, I guess you would say. I call it like it's the difference between a beautiful woman with makeup and without makeup. Without doing these little touches, it's the beautiful woman without makeup, still a beautiful woman. You put the touches on it, there's the makeup, and turns into gorgeous. So it's one of those finishing touches that makes it look good. And of course, I also put the Vet RX on the legs and feet to make them bright red. But in doing those, makes her look good, ready to be showy.
I use that Vetrix on a lot of stuff. It's very useful stuff. In all kinds of situations.
So with this breed, would you say that this breed is good for a beginner or someone who's, you know, kind of already done a few other different breeds and is a little more advanced of a fancier? Or...
Well, what's nice about the Old Dutch Capuchin is that it is a breed that is good for beginners. Someone who's never had pigeons before, if they have the correct setup, meaning that they have a loft that's conducive to pigeons, it has a good setup for nest boxes and roosts and free of drafts and, you know, a good roof and that kind of a thing. Anybody should be able to be successful with them. They breed well. They're good parents. In fact, when I first got into them in the early 1970s, there were these rare breeds fanciers, and they were using the Capuchins as foster parents because they're good parents. So they do well. So yes, they're good for a beginner. And what's nice is in the pigeon fancy, we have a lot of helpful people. You don't know what to do, there's lots of people to ask that can steer you in the right direction.
I've got a beginner question.
Mm-hmm.
Is this breed a popular breed? For instance, do you go to shows and see 7 different exhibitors with 20 birds? Or is this something that if you roll up to a show with your Capuchins, it's just going to be maybe yourself or one of their competitors?
It varies. Currently, our numbers are actually down just a little bit as we're seeing in the hobby as a whole. You know, you lose a few key people and the numbers go down and the enthusiasm wanes just a little bit. There are certain areas where the Capuchin's doing very well. In Utah, where I currently reside, we have a good group of Capuchin breeders. We're doing fine here. I formerly lived in California, and we had a good group in California. So there's a couple of areas where they're doing well. If you go to a show, say in the Midwest, you may or may not see birds there. So it does vary depending upon location.
It's interesting that you mentioned that losing a few key people can bring morale down. That's very true. Sometimes the cornerstone of the project, you know, if he disappears, you know, we don't have anybody to look to, or at least we don't feel like we have anybody to look to. We appreciate you doing this. this interview. It's very
Oh,
good
you bet.
information.
What are some of the pros and cons of this breed?
I guess you could say a con, depending on your perspective, might be that they breed too quickly. They are, like I said, excellent breeders. They're a marked breed, which means that they have their color, and then they have a white head, a white underbelly, a white tail, and then 12 to 7 white primary and secondary flights. And sometimes it gets a little bit frustrating when the markings are not what you would like. But it's with any breed of pigeon, and in fact, any animal, when you have a standard of perfection that you're going toward, you're going to have birds that or animals that don't come close to the standard. That's just how it works. So it can be a little bit frustrating there, but mostly the birds are within the parameters that would allow them to be exhibited. Some of the things that push them out of competition would be, for example, a colored tail feather. A bird with a colored tail feather, even if you pull it, you still can't exhibit it. That's a disqualifying fault. The same thing with a bull eye. The eye should be pearl, but because they have a white head, there will always be occasional birds that have a bull eye. And when that occurs, it can be used for breeding stock, but as far as exhibition stock, you can't show it. So that can be a little bit frustrating.
Interesting you said that about the tail feather, the colored feather. I've asked this question before. Remember, Phil?
Yeah.
It's which would be worse, to have a missing feather or a colored feather, such as a blue feather?
Well,
you say they're both disqualifying?
Yes, we count tail feathers.
Okay.
The way that we judge our birds is we lean more toward a European method, and we do count the tail feathers.
Will you be going to the national show this year for the NPA?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't miss the national. I go to our local show here in Utah, the premier show. That's always the first weekend of November. I attend that show. It's a good show. The pigeon hobby is thriving in Utah, which I'm very pleased with. And then I go to a couple of shows in California, the Great Western, and then the Pageant of Pigeons, which is in Southern California. And then the national, wherever that happens to be. We drove out to Louisville this past year for the national. Lovely drive. Took us 30 hours, but it was a fun experience. And then we'll be driving to Oklahoma City in January of 2025 for the national there.
You're going to be showing some of the Old Dutch Capuchins there?
I will.
Okay.
And we let Old Dutch Capuchins in Arizona too. Should stop by.
Well, I used to come to the Phoenix show back in the 1980s. And it was a good show. It was mostly Modinas, but there was a good show. There'd be 500 Modinas, and then there would be, a few fancy breeds, and I'd bring my Capuchins there, and it was fun. Always had a good time, and it's unfortunately, like it is in many areas throughout the country, the numbers have dropped down. But I'd be happy to come back to Arizona again for a show. That'd be fun.
Yeah, we're members of the Arizona Pigeon Club, and that's something we talk about at our meetings. Is we're trying to build back up to getting to where we can hold on to a big show like that. So we're doing shows every 2 months. We got a young bird show coming up here by the time this comes out, it'll be over. It's coming up this weekend. But yeah, the club's growing. I mean, the Utah Pigeon Club, yeah, that's a really healthy club, and we were up at the Hurricane show. That was a good show. I didn't make that one in Salt Lake City. I'd like to check that one out sometime too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have an annual show in Arizona anymore?
No, we're still trying to plan for it. We might have one this December. It's still kind of something we're talking about. Okay.
Well, I would love to come if it works out where I'm free and able to come. Then I would love to drive down.
Yeah, it'd be nice. We do have I kind of chuckled when you said Modena, because there was a Modena club here that was really strong in Arizona, and the residual effects are still a lot of Modena guys show at the Arizona Pigeon Club shows. You see a lot of Modenas there, so they're still pretty strong. So Layne, where can the listeners find your book at? Are you on Amazon with this?
I am not. It was a self-published. I actually went through a company in Poland because it was a pretty good deal, and another pigeon guy I knew had gone that route, so I went to that, and I just did the outlay myself and paid out for it and had it shipped here, and I have about 50 left.
And how can people get their hands on one of them?
I'm on Facebook. That's probably the easiest way. Just message me. That's how people have been doing it. And then payment by PayPal seems to work pretty well. And then, I always bring a couple copies with me to shows for anybody that wants them.
I was just telling Chris, I won this one at the Hurricane Show up in Utah in the raffle.
All right. Good deal.
I've been studying.
It's always good to get different perspectives. Like I mentioned, my Modena friend that doesn't use baths for his birds, he still does well. I have a different approach, but you use whatever works for you. And I find it fascinating to see these different approaches and what works for some people and what doesn't quite work for others, and helps me to be a better pigeon guy.
Those Modenas probably jump in the bath pen and empty the whole thing out as soon as they get in there. So that's probably what's going on with that guy. Ryan Bateman. Right. I talked to Ryan Bateman about it. I was like, man, you know a lot about these American Bohemian powders, and I've not been able to find a book on them. And he's done so much research. I'm like, you should really just put something together for, I think it really helps the breed. Obviously having a national club helps the breed a lot. But, stuff like this book right here is a really good book for that sort of stuff. And I've been trying to get my hands on a book for parlor rollers, and I can't find a book for parlor rollers anywhere. Yeah. So if anybody else out there has tons of information and have done all kinds of research on a certain breed, especially through Amazon now, they make it pretty simple to throw together a book and just get it out there. I remember with like what Cam did, he started all these Facebook groups for different breeds of pigeons, and then people were like, whoa, I got that breed, I'll join that Facebook group, and it brought all these people together. And I think a book can kind of do the same thing and get people who are serious about those breeds.
Yeah.
You guys might want to think about audio books for guys like me.
That's weird.
I'll tell you what I have been thinking about of late. I'm just overwhelmed. I have too many irons in the fire. But video is really something that is so accessible. You can stream just about anything, and you have the advantage with video to see what you're talking about. So if I ever find some free time, I may venture into that.
I'll be your first subscriber.
Yep. Yeah, you definitely, this is really well illustrated, but like you're saying, the visual aspect would just be way easier.
Well, I'm a visual learner, and someone can describe something and maybe I'll get it, but if I can see what you're talking about, then it's like, okay, now I know what to do.
Well, Layne, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate this. And anybody who is interested at all in these breeds, check out the National Club. Hit up Layne on the Facebook, Layne Gardener on Facebook, and reach out to him about getting yourself a copy of this book. Thanks for coming on, Layne. Thanks for sharing your information with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the National.
Sounds great. Make sure you come to my photo room and say hi.
Well, we'll do.
All right. Thanks, guys.